Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. The night started with music, glasses clinking, and laughter that filled the rented hall. Friends were everywhere. Faces we hadn't seen in months. Old connections reignited by the energy of the party. She had dressed stunningly, a silver dress shimmering under the lights, her smile wide enough to make strangers turn their heads. I thought for a brief moment that maybe this would be the night where things felt right again between us. But halfway through the evening, after a few drinks and too much attention from everyone around, she leaned close to me, her voice low and sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Let me live this day to the fullest, just this once." She laughed, tossed her hair, and walked away before I could ask what she meant. I watched as she disappeared into the crowd, her hand brushing against the arm of a man I didn't know, her eyes bright in a way they hadn't been for me in months. I told myself not to overreact, that maybe I was imagining things, that maybe she was just being playful. But the hours passed, and she didn't return. Every time I asked someone if they'd seen her, I got vague gestures toward the back rooms, the patio, the parking lot. Eventually, I stopped asking. By the time midnight rolled into 2 a.m., I knew exactly where she was, even without proof. I drove home alone, the silence in the car pressing against my chest like a weight. Our house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, her car absent. I sat in the living room, lights off, staring at the front door. Each tick of the clock carved deeper into me, but I stayed calm. Rage would have been easy, but rage burns fast and leaves you empty. What I wanted wasn't fire, it was clarity. She didn't come home that night. Morning light crept in through the blinds before I finally moved. I gathered my things, documents, clothes, valuables, and placed them neatly into bags I had hidden away weeks earlier when her distance first began. I had known something like this was coming. Maybe not the details, but the shape of it. She wasn't careful with her lies, and I had stopped pretending not to notice. By noon, I had already called a locksmith. The locks were changed within the hour. Her keys, once fitting neatly into our life, were now useless metal. I stood in the doorway when the locksmith finished, holding the new set in my palm like a final line drawn. When she finally returned, it was early afternoon. Her makeup was smeared, her hair tangled, her dress wrinkled from a night that told its own story. She walked up the driveway slowly, her expression wavering between confidence and hesitation. She pulled her keys from her bag and tried the lock. Nothing. She tried again, rattling the handle. Her smile faltered. I watched from inside, hidden in the shadows of the hallway. She jiggled the keys again, panic spreading across her face. Then she knocked, tentative at first, then louder. "Jake, open the door!" I waited. The knocking grew harder. "What's going on? Why doesn't my key work?" Finally, I turned the knob and pulled the door open. The look on her face when she saw me standing there was something I'll never forget. Her confidence shattered instantly. Her skin went pale, her eyes wide, as though she had just come face to face with a version of me she didn't recognize. Why doesn't my key work?" she stammered. "Because it doesn't belong here anymore," I said quietly. She tried to laugh it off. "Don't be dramatic, it was just one night. You're seriously changing the locks because I didn't come home?" "It wasn't just one night," I answered. "It was every lie, every excuse, every moment you pulled away. Last night was just the proof you thought I'd never find." Her mouth opened, then closed, searching for a defense that wouldn't come. She reached out, but I stepped back, letting the gap between us widen. "You chose what you wanted," I said. "Now live with it." Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't move me. She wasn't crying because she regretted what she'd done. She was crying because she'd been caught, because the comfort she thought would always be there had vanished. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We can fix this. Just let me in." I shook my head. Not this time. I closed the door slowly, her figure still standing outside, her sobs muffled by the wood. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not joy, not triumph. Just the stillness that comes when you finally stop holding on to something that was never really yours. But the story didn't end there. What happened next, the way the truth spread, the way people saw her, the way my life began to rebuild in ways neither of us expected. That was the part nobody saw coming. The morning after I closed the door, I made coffee and let the house breathe. The living room still held the echo of last night. The faint smell of her perfume, a heel mark in the entryway, a glass with a lipstick ring forgotten on the counter. I didn't smash things or hurl speeches into empty rooms. I opened the windows, washed the glass, and set out boxes. If endings have a sound, it's tape pulling from the roll and sealing what you no longer live in. By noon I had gathered what was mine without argument: documents, tools, books she never touched, the jacket my father gave me. I took photos of every room before I moved anything else, not out of spite but for the quiet record. Then I sent her a single message: "Your belongings are safe. Text me a time to pick them up. I won't be here. Leave the keys on the counter." She called immediately. I let it ring out. She texted paragraphs, apologies, explanations, attempts to shrink the night to a misunderstanding. When I didn't answer, the tone flipped. I was heartless. I was dramatic. I was trying to trap her with a gesture that made me look strong. I put the phone face down and labeled another box. By evening, whispers had already started pulsing through our circle. Friends who'd seen her leave the party in a stranger's car began connecting dots. Friends who liked gossip turned into archivists. I didn't feed anyone lines. When asked, I said one sentence: "We're separating. There's nothing more to discuss." That sentence closed 10 conversations in a row. It also opened a few I didn't expect. Quiet messages from people who had wondered for months why she treated me like a placeholder. The first practical move was money. I closed our shared card, moved my direct deposit to a personal account, and left a small buffer for bills due that week. I emailed the landlord: "Remove her from access." He replied with a single word: "Done," and the faint satisfaction of a man who has watched too many messy leases go sour. I changed the passcodes she picked and the streaming logins she monopolized. Every small click felt like air coming back into the room. That night, I slept in a house that sounded different. Without her late-night calls and restless pacing, the place settled into a steady hum. I woke before dawn and ran until my ribs loosened. When I returned, a message waited: "I'll be there at 6 to get my things. Don't try anything." The threat pretended to be toughness. All I heard was fear. I didn't want a scene on the porch, so I left before 5 with my boxes stacked in the trunk. I drove to a nearby diner and watched the doorway through the window's reflection while picking at eggs I didn't taste. 6 came and went. At 6:40, a rideshare rolled to the curb. She stepped out with sunglasses on and her chin up, the costume of someone who wants to look unbothered. A man got out of the back seat after her, the same one from the party. He didn't touch her. He followed 3 steps behind like a rumor keeping its distance. I didn't go back. I texted the code to the lockbox on the side gate and the security camera link I'd installed that morning. The footage would sit on the cloud like a doorman with an excellent memory, not to post or trade, just to keep chaos from rewriting itself later. While I waited, curiosity tapped me on the shoulder and pointed to the party's shared album. Photos from the night had begun to populate, the way lights switch on in an empty building. In one clip, I saw her head thrown back, laughter bright and careless. In another, the stranger leaning in too close, his hand hovering at her waist like a promise he hadn't asked permission for. The videos didn't prove what happened after 2 a.m., but my bones didn't need proof. They had heard the sentence no one else did: "Let me live this day to the fullest, just this once." Names started arriving with the pictures. Someone tagged the stranger. I clicked. His page was open. Travel photos, gym mirrors, a dog with a crooked ear, and a wedding band in half the shots. I scrolled farther and found what I didn't expect: a post from a woman smiling in a small kitchen, a baby on her hip, the same dog at her feet. "Proud of you," she had written under a new job announcement. Her last name matched his. My stomach went cold, then steady. I stared at her for a long minute, then sent a message that began with, "I'm sorry to involve you," and ended with a link to the shared album and the timestamps. I didn't accuse, didn't spit. I offered information the way you hand someone a flashlight at the mouth of a cave. She wrote back an hour later: "Thank you. No drama." Just 2 words that meant the room she lived in had tilted too. At 8, my door camera pinged. My wife stood on the porch holding a box, the stranger beside her looking at his shoes. She reached for the knob, remembered, and pulled her hand back quickly as if the metal could bite. Then she lifted the mat, found the lockbox, and typed the code. The key turned. They stepped inside. I didn't watch them walk through the rooms. I didn't need to see her open the closet and trace the outline where my suits had been, or the moment she realized the ring box was gone from the dresser. I washed my plate, tipped the server, and drove to a storage unit with a month-to-month lease and a roll-up door that clattered like punctuation. When I got back to the neighborhood, a second car I didn't recognize idled at the curb. A woman stepped out wearing a hoodie and expression you could sharpen pencils with. She walked straight past my wife's rideshare, up the steps, and pressed the bell. My camera caught the exact second the door opened. My wife answered. She froze, her face draining of color so quickly it looked like a trick of light. The stranger's wife stood on the threshold with her hands in her pockets and her jaw set. The man, caught halfway down the hall with a lamp in his arms, stopped moving and turned to stone. "Hi," the woman said, voice flat from exhaustion rather than rage. "I'm here for my husband, and for the truth you owed me weeks ago." My wife stammered something about misunderstanding, about boundaries, about not wanting to cause trouble. The woman's eyes flicked to the camera. "You already did," she said. "Now let's be adults." I hit save on the clip and set the phone face down. This wasn't my scene. I had invited honesty to the doorstep, and it arrived exactly on time. I didn't picture a screaming match. I pictured coats on a rack where they didn't belong, and apologies handed out like coupons no one wants to redeem. However it unfolded, it no longer required my attendance. She texted 3 times that night. First, "You're cruel." Then, "We need to talk." Finally, "Please." I answered once. "Pick up the rest of your things tomorrow at noon. Someone will meet you." That someone wasn't me. It was a friend who had offered to help and who knew how to be polite with a spine of steel. We stacked her boxes in the entry like a boarder. She cried again, real tears running down cheeks that wanted a different audience. I nodded to my friend. He closed the door gently. Inside, the house exhaled. The days that followed rearranged quickly. The stranger's wife filed whatever paperwork. Wives file when the ground gives out and you refuse to fall with it. He moved out of his home and, from what our overlapping acquaintances reported, into a furnished place that smelled like bleach and regret. My wife ping-ponged between anger and pleading, a rhythm that loses power when the person you're aiming at won't dance anymore. I kept every response short, practical, time-stamped. The story tried to hire me as a character. I stayed the narrator and set the script down. What surprised me most wasn't her outrage. It was the relief that slid into the spaces panic used to occupy. I woke early without dread. I cooked meals no one criticized for being plain. I sat on the back steps after dark and listened to the wind unzip the leaves from the trees. I filled the rooms with quiet things: fresh sheets, a plant that wanted east light, a record that crackled at the start because someone loved it hard before me. People always ask if revenge felt sweet. The truth is simpler. Revenge felt like not needing it. I had changed the locks, yes. I had invited truth to knock, yes. But the thing that steadied me most was the sight of my life returning to its original shape, honest, unadorned mine. There was, however, one moment no one expected, the thing that would become the sentence friends repeated when they told the story later. It happened the next week at noon, when she came for the last box and found the door opening to someone she least wanted to see. Not me. Not the man from the party. Not even his wife. It was the person who had loved her longest and believed her last. Her mother stood there, holding the spare key I'd returned that morning and a folder of printed messages she'd asked to see. She looked at her daughter the way thunderstorms look at fields, sorry for what must happen and unwilling to stop. "We're going home," she said. "Not to yours, to mine. You don't get to play house in a place you tried to burn down." My wife didn't speak. She couldn't. She followed her mother down the steps like a child leaving a classroom after the bell, glancing back once at the door that no longer knew her. I locked it, slid the chain, and stood for a minute with my hand on the wood. The house felt taller. There was still a final act to come, a room and a microphone and the moment when she'd sit perfectly still while strangers stood for me. But even before that night, I understood the quiet ending already resting in my pocket. Sometimes the best revenge is simply this: truth at your threshold, love that refuses to be cheap, and a key that turns only for the person who earned it. Weeks slipped by after her mother pulled her away from the doorstep. For the first time in years, I woke up without checking my phone, in fear of what storm was waiting. The house grew quieter, lighter, like it had been holding its breath and finally let it out. I filled the silence with work, music, and conversations with people who valued me in ways she never had. But the story refused to stay in shadows. Word of what happened at the party, of her night with another man, spread beyond our circle. Nobody needed me to confirm anything. The photos, the whispers, and the simple fact that she no longer lived in our house told enough. She tried rewriting the narrative, framing herself as misunderstood, saying I had acted rashly. But lies collapse when truth is steady, and I refused to feed her side of things. Silence, I found, carried more power than any defense. I focused instead on rebuilding myself. Running turned into training. Late nights turned into early mornings filled with planning. Work that had once been routine suddenly bloomed with opportunity. People noticed the difference in me, the confidence, the calm, the way I walked into rooms no longer carrying invisible weight. My boss asked me to give a talk at a leadership event. I hesitated at first, but something inside me said yes. The event was held in a downtown hall, seats packed with professionals, students, and community leaders. I wasn't a celebrity, but the story of resilience travels fast. When my name was announced, I stepped onto the stage and felt a rush I hadn't expected. I spoke about setbacks, about betrayal in broad strokes, about how silence and action speak louder than anger. I told them that the truest revenge is not destruction, but transformation, becoming someone they can no longer reach. The audience rose to their feet in applause when I finished. The sound rolled over me like thunder, filling every crack I once thought would never heal. And then, in the middle of that crowd, I saw her. She hadn't expected me to notice her, but our eyes met. She was seated near the back, half hidden, her face pale and her lips trembling. For once, she had no performance, no smirk, no explanation rehearsed. She just sat frozen while the people around her clapped for me, stood for me, celebrated the man she had dismissed as not enough. The sight of her didn't hurt me anymore. It didn't spark rage or longing. It only reminded me how far I had come. She thought leaving with another man at that party had made her powerful. Instead, it stripped her mask and freed me to become someone she could never diminish again. As I stepped off the stage, people shook my hand, asked for advice, thanked me for speaking. I didn't look back at her. I didn't need to. The silence she sat in was louder than anything she could have shouted. That night, I went home to my own space, my own peace, and poured myself a drink. I looked around the house that once carried her chaos and now held only calm. For the first time, I felt gratitude for her betrayal, because without it, I would never have learned the strength of walking away. She wanted a night of freedom. What she gave me was a lifetime of it. And that, in the end, was the part nobody saw coming.